Hey, Chris. Good morning
Hey,
for me, and it's midday around for you, yeah?
yes. Good morning, Reid. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well today. Yeah, I'm excited. It's my kind of my last day in the office, so to speak, until I pop over. Oh, and
Mm.
actually, I just realized one thing. While I want to give you a chance to give an introduction a little on yourself, but I realized of all the things that I was looking for in updating the stream, I forgot to put your name down at the bottom for guest speaker.
Guest
So Chris
speaker
Wagner is
and
joining me
guest
today.
speaker.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's Guy Human, you know. So I can update
Uh,
that right quick, but I am excited. I'm about to go on a trip to Scotland, hence the slight distractions and everything. But I'm happy to get a chance to hang out and have some fun discussions today. I think on some practices for development and managing Power BI. So it's going to be a fun conversational topic today for sure.
I'm excited about this, but I want to know more about this trip to Ireland. How long are you going to be gone for?
Scotland, but
Scotland.
yeah, I'll be
Scotland.
gone until the 18th.
Oh my.
So I'm gonna pop this into here,
Of September
and
or
yeah,
October?
I'm planning to be in there over in Scotland for yeah 12 days.
Okay.
And let me just finish this up. There you go. Okay, it's hard to multitask and talk. All right,
Yeah.
perfect. So yeah, I will be in Scotland for about 12 days. I'm
Okay.
pretty much hitting up every area, the Highlands.
Mm.
I will also be doing Speyside, some of the Isle of Skye, which I think I'm probably most excited for because that seems to be the prettiest, where there's a lot of like some of the fairy pools and cliffs. Eat a lot of good Scottish food. Uh, go through Glasgow and Edinburgh, and spend 2 nights, 3 days over on uh, the the Islay region and drinking a lot of really peaty scotches and everything. So
There you
yeah,
go.
yep.
It's,
But
the
there's going to be a
Scotches is
lot of
what
distillery.
you're.
There's a lot of distillery tours, and Lagavulin actually has a jazz festival happening the weekend that we'll be there at their distillery with like stages and music and everything. So it's going to be a good time. I will I'll be coming back quite rosy cheeked and happy.
Well, that is fantastic. I cannot wait to follow follow along with what I'm sure is a cavalcade of pictures and tweets or X's and as you go on your trips.
Absolutely,
Excited.
yeah. It's gonna be fun. This is a nice little end to a short week, and I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's fantastic. So
For the
excited to
people
get
who
into
aren't
doing this.
familiar with you and Kratos BI and all that, and some of your data god stuff, do you want to give a little introduction to yourself and kind of what you do, your involvement now with Baker Tilly? It's your first year there and everything.
Sure. Yeah. My name's Chris Wagner. I'm director of data solutions at Baker Tilly, a consulting firm. I've been in the data field for like a little over 2 decades. Started off on like the Oracle Tableau side of the house, but I really spent over the last decade working in the Microsoft MSBI stack. And I spent a great deal of that time working in large enterprises and on, like in at large companies doing BI right, which was always my mantra and always what we had going on. Because you're always uh, over in demand, understaffed, and you have way too much going on. And so that's where like having best practices and standards has become really a passion of mine because, well, frankly, you can't do it without it. And so that's
Exactly.
where like this whole conversation came from, and um, that evolved into one day someone said, "Wow, Chris, you are like a data god. This is just amazing what you can do." And I said, "No, it's not me. It's people like Reid Havens, and it's Paul Turley, who was on my live stream yesterday. I have my own YouTube channel, Chris BI. Check it out, like, subscribe, all that good stuff." Um, but I wanted to like highlight all the great work that's out there because no one person knows all of the tools or capabilities or like what are all of the best practices or how to make these things work. And so that's why I create Kratos BI, home of the data gods, where it highlights the amazing work that the people such as yourself contribute to this community.
It's a fun program, and I do enjoy the graphical art that you have from those. I do. I know you just basically take a picture and you have some artist that you found on Fiverr or something else that kind of
Mhm.
just does a little artist rendering. I'm sure they run it through probably like an initial filter, and then they do the little tweaks to polish up exactly how they want it to look.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he does. I'm sure. I'm a big supporter of supporting artists, and not just using AI. I do like that hand touch, because every once in a while someone comes along and says, "I want an eye patch and I want a crow," and or something along those lines that I couldn't do if I was just throwing a mask on or a filter on a piece of artwork. So.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think it's a shining example of kind of the community involvement. And I'm for the people watching, I'm dropping some links for Chris's YouTube and Kratos BI website, including all of the data gods that are listed up here. There's a lot of I think it shows the connected part of the community. Like I know that a lot of my knowledge isn't just from myself. It's what I kind of market myself as an somebody who's involved in the MVP community, or just the kind of Power BI expert community in general. There's many questions that you'll ask me that I have very, not a lot of information on directly myself, but I could probably within half a day or less reach out to a handful of individuals and get you a clear, definitive answer on to that question from somebody else who's more of an expert in whatever it is. Like, and that might be like specifically with APIs or embedded or anything in the Microsoft ecosystem. So I think it's the rising waters raise all ships scenario. But we all are very collaborative, I think, which makes it collective expertise from all of it.
Well, and you're spot on, and that connection with through some back channels that Microsoft has created to other brilliant people like yourself, and like that whole community and that product team, that really does make a lot of the extra efforts that we do really worthwhile. That not only does it connect us with awesome people, but it helps us in our jobs just deliver better solutions faster. Because I don't know about you, Reid, but I work long hours sometimes, and anything I can do to work a handful of less hours, I am all in that. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a degree of, all right, I could spend an hour and a half of client time or my time figuring this out. I'm just Google first, obviously, just to see if that's an end. If not, then ask any of the communities or channels that you have. Just like, has anybody ever encountered X before, and how have you approached? Oh, here's a link to X, Y, Z, FK. All of these are adjacent and will give you an answer. So don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Right. And I think I said on the interview with Paul Turley yesterday, I don't need to think a thunk that's already been thought of by someone who knows how to think thunks better than I could think a thunk. So yeah, I'm down.
Can you
but
also
that leads us, what's that?
I was just going to say one last thing is I'm noticing the fabric equation. So that's fabric equals pie chart with Power BI. Is that Python? Power BI Python, OneLake divided by OneLake plus, and then I can't notice the symbol on the right, but it's a little equation that's behind you on the TV.
Oh, yes. So that's fabric equals data engineering with Power BI and data science over OneLake plus real-time streaming analytics. So.
And those are all the icons I think that Microsoft provides, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Nice. That I'm assuming that's on a shirt. You put that on a shirt already, right?
I have not.
I mean, that seems like a really good shirt.
Yeah,
that would be like just right across the chest, and like somebody would, that would be a great shirt for you to give away as like little prizes at like presentations or at conferences. That's a good one.
That is a good one. I like it, and I think I like to think of things as math equations, so that's why I've been using what we're going to be talking about today for a very, very long time. But this is the first time that I've kind of like exposed my inner thought processes to the world. So Reid, I'm hoping that we can have a good conversation around this as we delve into this topic. And so to people in the queue, I do live streams as well. So like happy to answer questions. Just, let us know. Happy to engage with you as well on this.
Yes, please. Yeah, keep the questions coming if you have any as we're going through all of this stuff and having our conversations. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. Well, do we want to go over to it?
Yes, and I'm going to go ahead and flip right over to the screen. There we are.
Awesome. All right. So I don't know if you can see me as well or not here. I got a distorted view, but we're talking BI Solution Algebra. The whole concept being we want to deliver solutions at scale that we have dependable, reliable capabilities, but we also understand what it means when we've deployed a solution. All right. Now, when we talk about analyzing anything, these are the 5 W's and the H. We're going to change this up just a little bit here, though. We always want to be starting with why. Why the heck are we doing any of these things? Why does this matter? If you're not familiar with the book by Simon Sinek, Start With Why, this is a must read. I try to read this once a year. Reid, have you read this book before?
I don't think I have. This start with why, but I'll make sure to drop an Amazon link in the chat for that.
Holy cow. This is straight up a must read. This is just in general in life. Make sure you understand why you're out there doing things. Okay, so this topic straight up doesn't sound sexy. We're talking algebra, right? Like nobody likes that except for I guess us nerds. So like shout out to everyone who has joined and is watching now. Clearly you are in on that factor, but like, why are we getting into this? Really, the whole point is we want to create formulas that we can, ensure that as we build out and roll out solutions, we maximize the ROI of the solutions that we're delivering, because that's what gets us more funding. So we can do more work, so that we can add more team members, so that we can grow the solutions that we're doing, and we can deliver more value. It also means we want to help on building dependable timelines. Like, can they really expect this in a month, or is it 3 months, or is this a year down the road, right? We want to understand what that means so that we can get to that, right? Also means we want to have reliable expectations. At that end of that work, people are investing in these solutions, right? Your team is out there and you're building out something that you want people to use. They want to know what they're getting, and they want to know that they can count on it, right? And along those lines, that needs to be high quality and something that they know they can count on and depend upon, okay? Because nobody likes it when oh yeah, that's the Power BI report. It refreshes some days, I think. Usually on Wednesdays it gets done. Mondays and Tuesdays it's always off. But Wednesdays it's all right.
I would hope they would at least know if it's failing or not, for a refresh.
You sure would. But do they, right? Have you incorporated all of the things necessary, right? Do you have that capability in there, right? These are questions that a lot of people are asking, right? But I think we kind of touched on this. My name is Chris Wagner. I am a director of Data Solutions. We kind of covered all these things, so it's nice to meet everyone. Hello. Do follow me on the social medias platforms. All right. Where did my other Who slide go? My other Who slide up? Oh, I do have it. Okay, but this.
Good for you.
Sorry, I've got this weird. I've got this weird visual going on here. But really, this is for everyone who's working inside this space. So, calling out some of the people here that will have the biggest bang for the buck. But Reid, you're a consultant. How many people are in your organization right now?
Full time, just me, but okay. I bring in a lot of contractors basically. So if my plate's full or somebody needs a very deep dive into can you help us configure an Azure database? I can mostly do that, but it's probably going to take me 2 hours to do that, where I could just bring someone on to do that in an hour. So right. I flex my staff out as needed.
Yeah, and a lot of people and a lot of teams do that same thing, right? So I think this type of BI solution algebra is important to take those concepts and ideas into consideration as we start to get into this. All right. Now, what we're trying to do is basically extend upon some concepts that are out there. The whole concept of Lean or Six Sigma. I don't know if you've ever studied that before, Reid. Have you been a Lean guy or worked at a Six Sigma organization?
So I'm quite familiar with the term itself, but and I've been adjacent to it with people who have ran it themselves, but I've never been a project manager for it, but just been involved in teams that kind of go through that approach in terms of development milestones and everything else to try to, optimize the efficiency of it.
Sure. And this is very much along that spirit, is that we're trying to get to that type of framework where we can really optimize it. But I kind of look at things like lean processing, Six Sigma, agile development, some of these other practices as like business religions. They're the priests in the temple that are disconnected from what goes on in the real world. We don't want that. We want the people, we want to be practitioners who are out and working with these tools, working with these concepts, and figure out how we can deliver them. So as we talk through this, understand that we shouldn't be taking a religious approach to this. This should be a soft understanding, like a soft way of working with these things. But the idea being that we can create a calculation around this. And Reid, have you used the Fibonacci sequence before?
In a few things, not specifically with business, but I'm familiar with it as far as a lot of code and codexes and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, the whole concept, and this comes to play big in Scrum, is the idea that you can kind of like rate relative work comparative to each other, right? Like you can understand what one is. You can understand like what like one stacked on top of one is, what that sizing is. So that's like a 2, and incrementally you can go to a 3. But as you start to get larger and larger and complexities start to grow, that understanding of what it's going to take to deliver on components starts to become hazier. And that's why you go from 1, 2, 3, 5 to 8 in the Fibonacci sequence. And that's a very common practice when it comes to estimating things. We're going to be using some of those concepts as we go through this, okay? So that we can help understand what it is we're looking at, right? Now, we may be talking about like, where are we going to start working with this stuff? Now, you may say, hey, it's natural to start beginning with these things around, like, as you lay out projects and, do big planning events. It's very effective in those cases, but I think more so, it's the type of thing that you can do at lower levels, and doing it at that individual request, or estimating an impact on a change, or on managing a ticket or something that has come into your work queue. That can really help you in understanding what those blocks of work are as we start to plug those into formulas. Okay. Now, I think we really want to, as we do this, I like to start small but get going right away on things, right? So this is not something that we want to drag out and like only do when we're at a big planning event. We want to do this like when work is coming in. We want to be thinking about it. We want to be lining that up, and frankly, I say start now. Like and this is something I'm bad at, so I'm talking about the things that are helpful in my life but are not good. I'm not necessarily good at always, but I recognize I'm not good at it. Reid, are you good at blocking off your day or managing the tasks that you go through in a day?
I'm pretty good at that. I actually specifically reserve a 4-hour block every Friday for kind of self-paced learning from 1 to 5. So like nothing's outside of maybe an emergency is ever allowed to take up that time. And now I've definitely learned where I don't use any of those scheduling like Calendly and all that other stuff where people can automatically kind of schedule blocks with you if you have available. I've stopped using those because the 3 hours that I might have available left for development and other stuff get completely taken up with a meeting, and you look at your calendar and you have 7 hours of calls between like 12 people, and it's like my brain's gonna bleed doing this much. So I'm very careful on making sure that if I can, no more than maybe half my day is on calls, which sometimes includes MVP calls, which take up quite a lot of time too.
Sure.
But yeah, I just, otherwise I think I get burned out a little bit, either from having to listen, because 4 hours of just learning is a lot, or having to talk. So I try to abide by that like half rule, where hopefully half my day can at least be for development or emails or whatever I need to do for me without having to be on a Teams call with someone.
That's exactly right. Like how we can block and manage our days. So like that type of a metric is fantastic to get started, right? Like you've already articulated, what's your small goal? half your day is on development and not in meetings and not in stuff, right? Like that's a fantastic, like, thumb in the wind to help you down that path as to, are you being successful, right? And I love, that's exactly what I mean when I talk about like what foremost we use to be successful. Now, when we start to get into this is where we start, or when we talk about BI algebra or solution algebra, we really start to like hit in on these kind of two different groupings, and one which is, we'll start with variables. We'll talk about the different variables that will impact the success of your work and success of projects, right? And then the next piece, we really get into like, how can you start to conceive of those into like an equation? That's the type of thing that I think can have huge impacts. And I'm just realizing I lost a slide here. I had a fun slide. Where did it go? Where's my notes? Yes, so like you can come up with the equation like, hey, you have a direct impact on the amount of time and energy it's going to take based upon the number of cats that you're herding in a given project, right? And I think those equations are actually helpful to take into consideration when it comes to these assessments. All right, so let's talk about what does it mean for like executing on this stuff, right? All right, and if like this is too long, I put just in like a too long, didn't read, like got through this. I'm not gonna go through this because we're about to go into the details, but for those of you who already got sick of us, here it is. Sorry. But some of the variables I really think about here, oops, where did I go here? Like, what's the level of the solution that it gets into? Well, and we'll kind of go through this, but there's all sorts of variables that will influence your project that we really need to be considerate of, right? So, like, if we're talking about the level of the solution, I mean, are we talking about work that needs to be done by data engineering? Is it just in Power BI? Do you need data scientists involved, right? Or if so, if you're going to need that and you don't have that, what do you do in those situations? Like, Reid, you talk a lot about the Power BI side of the house.
Yep.
Fabric is now here, right? How much have you worked with on that data engineering space, or do you do a lot in that area?
I haven't gotten as far as learning Spark and some of the data pipelines. I
Mhm.
think once clients actually start to use those, then I will eventually learn. I'm sure at some point there will be a project where we need a more complex data pipeline built. I'll tackle that if and when. I've built my own data warehouses a couple of times now, and I've also tested out the Lakehouse with the associated data set that's built on top of it, and played around with that a bit. So I'd say like I've familiarized myself with the new places to park your data from a Power BI design. I haven't quite gotten to the engineering perspective yet because I know that's going to be more of a deep dive and learning some new languages and everything to start coding with notebooks and everything. So it is on my list, but I find that the learning often comes through organically when I'm actually able to get a project from a client rather than just poke around it on myself. Because then you don't use it for 8 months. You come back to a project and, oh, I've completely forgotten everything that I played around with 8 months ago. So I'll wait for a client need to start exploring that and then learn along the way.
Sure. And worse, it's changed radically since you explored it, right? Like, oh,
Yep.
Hey, I learned it. I know how it works. I don't touch it for 8 months. Now, even if you knew it exactly, oh, it's completely different. So 100%. Especially though, if we're talking about very large solutions or in large companies, there's often dedicated data engineering teams that are out there, right? And they have requirements. Hey, land these sources, bring this in, do these transformations. And then your analytics engineers, they start to work with this stuff. And or maybe you have data scientists who are providing feedback and input, right? And it doesn't even have to be in Fabric. Just these are the areas and buckets that there are that we talk about when it comes to what level in your solution architecture are we talking about, right? And then we're also start to get into like, and this is my absolute favorite slide. Are you familiar with, or diagram? Are you familiar with this, Reid? Or Do you
Yeah, I
use it
mean,
separate?
it's the increased scale. I mean, in a way, it's this shares 3 out of 4 of the categories that we have, even for like sharing and deploying in Power BI. You have your personal workspace,
Mhm.
you have the workspace, you have the app. The one extra layer would be the enterprise at the top, but individual team and department is my workspace, app in a lot of degrees. And in terms of, well, in this increased control, but also increased exposure. So I've seen many parallels to this in that increasing scale and complexity as it moves up in with features or distribution or any whatever arrow increasing that you're referring to.
Well, I mean, we're really, as we in large organizations and really in any company, as you go up outside of that individual, go that team, the department, the amount of control that has to go on around whatever that activity just increases. Because there's one thing to like put together a report for an individual that's just trying to understand what's going on, um, but that's completely different for a report that's going to go out to 30,000, to 250,000, to a million people, right? Like you have some real significant change control differences there, right? You have real different degree of eye on details and on
Hmm.
like support capabilities, right? Uh, Understanding how this is going to go, who's going to run this, who's going to operationalize this, is really going to impact the amount of effort that goes into this, right? Like most enterprises have at least a dev, a test, and stage environments in all of the work that they do, right? That adds a radical degrees of difficulty or degrees of additional work along with any deployment, right? Because you're no longer just deploying into production, right? So,
Agreed.
you know,
And just as a small plug, 'cause I always forget to do these things. Speaking of enterprise stuff, Steve and I have actually done a couple of in per online live trainings on
mm,
enterprise features. So it's everything from your data set to your tenant to Git management, version control, all the things that really whatever size your company is, here are features that can be deployed today or can be considered for the future to ensure that you are ship shape with your within your organization to reduce complexity and to ensure proper security and distribution admin governance. So for people tuning in, we just actually finished it yesterday. We did our
huh?
second batch with about 25 people this time. We had almost 60 people in the first round, and we do plan to release more of a recording, or a recorded version of it, just on a learning platform for people to watch at a self-paced thing. But it goes to a lot of what you just talked about, which is making sure that you know all the tools in the toolbox to ensure that at any of these levels you're properly mm, turning the dials and everything to make sure that you're not adding complexity or problems for yourself today or down the road.
Yeah, that is spot on, and I have seen some of the videos that you have done with Steven. They've been fantastic. I do hope you get that into a consumable online space because I would
Mhm.
really like to check that out. That's great. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, and I think that goes into a next big thing that a lot of people don't realize that they're doing or incurring. Oh, this is a very wordy slide, but liked a lot of it. But technical debt is something that we often uh, really knowingly take on at times, right? We say, you know what, we're just going to do this to get this into production because we've got a deliverable, we've got a deadline, we need to get these things out the door. But we need to be taking into consideration the technical debt that we incur as we roll out solutions, and then make sure that that technical debt is not just tracked, but really understood by the business and the people who are sponsoring or managing projects. Because when it comes back around and like all of a sudden that technical debt becomes a limiting factor, it could be a real hard conversation. Like, hey, no, we can't put in that feature until we do that full build out like we had initially designed, and that's going to take 3 months. And making sure that that's documented and well understood can be a big deal when it comes to like the success of the work you're doing. Reid, do you do anything around like acceptance of technical debt in your projects or engagements?
So I'm aware of technical, like, so Maybe expand upon the question when you say acceptance of technical debt.
Sure. So for example, let's say the first one that's jumping into my mind. You want your model to be able to be translated into all sorts of different currencies. Right? You know, that's the ultimate goal. Like, yes, it's a global solution. I want, whoever's consuming this information to be able to see it inside their native currency. So if we're in the US, it's dollar. If we're in Britain, it's the pound. If we're in Europe, it's the euro, or whatever, right? You want to be able to see that. And you want to also be able to have, let's say, different currency translations based upon different like rate structures. Something that
Okay.
finance teams are all about, and it's a big deal. That's not easy. That is
Yeah,
not.
and we have that triangle with technical debt too, which is if you want something done, you have good quality,
Yep.
fast, or cost efficient, and you can
Yes.
only ever pick two of those. You're
Yep.
not allowed to have all three.
Oh, note to
Um,
self, Chris. Put that in the slide.
yeah, because that's a great one. I love
Yeah.
that analogy. It's you can only ever pick two, but I would also argue that some technical debt is not just necessarily. I would expand upon the true definition because it doesn't have to just be quick or poor. What about that client that has the manager, the business pressure part, where they really want this like pop up to do this and that? Like, all right, that's going to be like 13 bookmarks to do this. It's possible, but I'm going to have to throw in some stupidly complex stuff to make it happen. And then whomever I hand this off to, there's no way they're going to be able to update this. You're going to have to come back to me to fix this. Like, and like, I'll be very transparent on it. I do not recommend this. I recommend this. It's 5 clicks rather than 2, but it's going to be easier for somebody else to manage. No, we want it this way. Okay, but like to a degree, you're golden. Give me a golden handcuff to this. Like you're going to have to continue to pay me to update this. As long as you're very aware that like outside of a true expert who built this, it's really hard to fix this thing. And because some managers really want a feature, even though it takes 10 times the cost and it adds a lot of complexity. So that's a debt that you're building into it just because it was done well and it was curated, but it just took a lot of extra time and you had to add 15 new things to the file rather than 2 or 0 to go another path that would have been more of the official way to do something rather than a hack workaround.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. And those types of decisions can be made all throughout, especially like larger projects. And as we get into some of these like additional formulas, like, hey, if we think of Roach's principle, right? As far upstream as possible, as far downstream as necessary. Well, as far upstream as possible, maybe the centralized data team should be creating this and making this available. But that team's backlog is booked for the next 38 months. Like you're not going to delay, or are you going to delay this project for 38 months to get on their backlog? Or are you going to choose to add that into a definition into a data flow or just into a table definition inside of your model? What would be better as you think about this? And I think all of that goes into like, what are the technical debt that we're choosing to accept today? And can we make good choices with that, right? Like, so in that example, a data flow is better because now that data flow can go like from a Power BI data flow into a Power BI Gen 2 data flow. And that could be directly imported into the lake, right? Like now there's no code difference there. So that
even from Power Query, technically, at least with the data flow, you can export the project file, right?
Yep.
You can still select all, right-click, copy, right-click, paste from desktop into the service, which gives you the same bulk set of queries with that. But yes, as you mentioned, as far upstream as possible, downstream as needed. But Power Query is actually a great fix that doesn't actually necessarily add a ton of technical debt, where like maybe something does need to eventually end up in the database, but that view is, you have to have a request. That request goes to review. That review then takes 2 to 4 weeks to get the new data. Okay, fine, I'm just going to throw the data together in Power Query. I get the exact table structure that eventually will be handed by the view, but then you just swap the query out later. So I think Power Query is a good example of times where you can at least apply a Band-Aid. You can get the data you need today for your model as long as it goes through the right checks and balances in QA. But then you know continue to have those conversations to push it upstream. Does it go to a flow? Does it go into nowadays like a data warehouse or a lake house? Or hey, is this just going to be translated into a SQL table sitting somewhere in a database? But it's really easy to swap the model out for that table as long as it has the same columns and rows. Essentially, you know, sometime down the road, that's a 5-minute switch to do that if and when needed.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that again when we talk about the variable about skills.
Excellent.
Right. Next big thing we talk about are like, and this probably should, is to many people is right at the top of the list. Like, it's the quantities, right? Like, how many of these things are you trying to bring in and pull in? So, if we think small and start small, we're talking about like, okay, hey, you got a request for a new table, awesome. But as we start to scale this up, you may have a request like, hey, our company just adopted Dynamics CRM, and we want to set up they've got Dataverse set up. We want to set up a live sync into Snaps, and we need to resource all of our CRM information over to the Dynamics space, right? Now, you can literally count out all of the tables that you have, right? Like that becomes a much more mathematical equation, right? And that leads into like, how many integrations do you have? Are you, because Dynamics CRM is out there and that becomes the source for customer information. Is it the source to start? Like, are you like, is there like dual sourcing that you need to do? Do you have to do an integration with the old source to like maintain current reporting structures that you'll then transition over, right? Like the integrations become challenging, right? And
Agreed.
that gets right. And then we go through all of these different things, right? So that quantity is probably the first thing people jump to. Now, that's the next one. And then the other big, most obvious one is your resources and availability. If you're talking about, Reid, you kind of outlined it before. If someone asked you to like do a deep dive in a SQL database, you could. Easier to just grab someone else, right? There's some timing constraints and some like negotiations and whatnot there, but you have to take those things into play when you lay out a timeline, because now you're starting to juggle variables. When you start to pull in outside resources, Reid, what does that typically do for you and project timelines?
I mean, there's always going to be a delay if additional resources are needed, unless somebody is like literally sitting on the bench, warmed up and ready to go. Just because something has probably changed in the project, some complexity. A rock's been lifted, and you find 3 smaller rocks underneath there that need to be lifted as well. And then some new resource needs to be brought in. So, I've had usually it's not too bad of a turnaround. I have enough of a resource collection to go after to be able to pull those in. But it's usually either conversations at the end of the day when I always tell the clients 2 things: is we either have to adjust the milestones within the current budget, or if complexity or something else is needed, we increase the budget. One of 2 happens. We either sacrifice something to a phase 2 if there is one, or that we add 10% into the whatever the resource cost is of said project.
Sure. And at a lot of companies, a lot of places, getting a new resource, if you're talking to an employee,
then you're like 6 to 12 months sometimes.
That's exactly right. Because
interviews are horrible.
It's 3 months of working with HR to get the posting ready, right? Then maybe 3 months of interviewing, and that first person's not going to accept the position often because your company's going to underestimate what they should pay, right? Like, hey, going rate for X position is $120,000 a year. Companies always think that position should be $90,000, and you have to lose a few, escalate, right? Like, it becomes this long, drawn-out process to get someone on. And then when they're on, you got to get them up to speed, right? So resourcing availability is a big challenge, especially when you're talking about large teams, right? So you'll have your employees, but you also then have your contractors. Now, contractors, consultants can come on quicker, but still there is a lead time to that. It's not, in most cases, it's not pull a trigger and they're there tomorrow. It's okay. You pull the trigger and lawyers start to talk, right? So there's
Exactly.
right. So there's challenges there that have to be taken into play when we're starting to talk about these larger teams or larger efforts, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this also brings us to like skill levels, and we kind of hit on this earlier. Like, hey, you may have someone who knows how to do something in Power Query, and that's awesome. Great, go do that. But if it's something that should go up into the enterprise space, the enterprise only accepts Python-based notebooks for deployments. Python doesn't get you there, right? Like that means you're dependent upon.
It also doesn't handle large data sets very well.
Right. Yeah. Well, Python or Power Query?
Python. I mean, I haven't worked a ton with it, but my understanding of like its scalability to say like transform hundreds of millions of rows as an example, it's not very efficient at really large data sets. It doesn't scale as well as R or other computational languages for large data sets.
I would wager there are people in the chat or around that would have disputes with that.
Again, I go less into statistics. It's just been described to me as not as scalable for like statistical computation when you're trying to do like linear regressions and other stuff like that. Because they both share the same functions, but yeah, I've just been, my understanding was that it doesn't do it well at scale when you're going like hundreds of millions. Like a few million rows is sure is fine, but if you go to hundreds of millions or billions or tens of billions, the scalability at some point hits a limit where that whatever computer it's running on requires a lot more resources than just another language that could do that same calculation a bit more efficiently.
Sure. And I mean that is a great example. If you only have people that know Python and they don't know R, all of a sudden you're capped and you're limited, right? But that's going to make impacts upon your solution design. On the people that you have. Like, do you have to send them to training? Do you have to skill them up? All of those things are challenges that you have to manage, as well as, if that $120,000 position, if you only have 90,000, what do you do? Do you hire a junior developer and hope that they can stretch and learn? Do you refuse to fill the position and have zero productivity? A lot of teams and people will go, I need a body. I'm going to train them up. I get it that they're not necessarily at the developer level we want, but we should be aware of that and honestly put that into factoring how long our projects are going to take. I don't think it's fair to say to a junior developer, just because they took a senior position for junior pay that they should work as a senior, right? Like they're
Agreed.
Just right. But all of these things come into that factoring capabilities, right? And then we get into like timelines, right? We've already kind of hit on this. Like, hey, if these things got to be delivered today, like or tomorrow, to address like, I don't know, an earthquake that just hit, and maybe I shouldn't say that because there could have been an earthquake that just hit, and I'm not trying to like knock on
yeah.
But like the lottery bus came through and hit some people, and people are very happy with their rich lottery winnings, right? And they need to adjust, right? Timelines are a thing. Understanding what we're going to deliver in a short term to meet business needs is important and impactful, right? Like that really helps with like answering those questions, but like let it be known what the impacts are on your design and your solution to deliver those on that faster timeline, right? That goes back to technical debt. All right, are you hanging with me, Reid? Does this make sense?
No, I mean these are all I think really good thoughts on both managing the organization, but also scaling out as well as needed, just because every rock is going to have 5 more rocks behind it. There's the 2 rock equation that I like to use is uncovering a rock reveals more. And then if you just try to give a manager a rock, they're always going to want another, it's a different rock right. Until you actually drive for, why do you need the rock? What is the rock supposed to give you?
Well, and that's why we start with why, right? um,
Absolutely.
and that goes into like the equations that we start to do when it comes to these solutions. So, we kind of like started to, hey, what's the big Fabric equation? It's like data engineering plus, all this stuff. But as simplified as possible, it's data engineering plus data analytics plus data science is what's going to lead to any data solution that you need to deliver. Now, a lot of that is going to be driven by your resources and your requirements. Where do you have people, and what are the requirements that it takes to deliver? If you only have data engineers on your available, but you have some reporting capabilities, are you going to say no, you can't do it, or are you going to say yes, this is something we still want to bring on? As someone who's big on the reporting side, Reid, how do you handle working with teams that need to generate reports but aren't necessarily as skilled as, say, yourself?
And you're referring to more from like the very final front end visualization perspective, is
Sure.
the deliverables. So it really, I mean, it goes back just to the audience a little bit in a degree. Like, I mean, the typical data analyst, like, they're not going to need much more than probably lines, bars, and charts and scatter plots. Like to me, the four cornerstone visuals that probably can represent pretty much all of your data are going to be some variation of a line chart, a scatter plot, or bar/column, some type of a column-based chart. And simple is good for them, and they want a little bit of those, maybe for some trends, and then the rest of the time just give me some detailed tables. So I don't over-engineer things. If there's a team that really doesn't care that much about visualization, it really doesn't need it that much, then it's a simple basic report is fine to deliver for those, versus more of the executives that they don't want to get into the weeds. They need to see high level stuff. They need to see more of the spark lines and all that others. So it's a lot of it's catering to the audience and determining, do we really need to teach you how to read 35 visuals, or can we just stick with a couple of cornerstone ones? Because all you're really needing is actually good data. You don't even have that yet because the data is dirty or needs to be cleaned up. So just, sometimes a company can hugely benefit from just having better quality data that's refreshed on a daily basis, which a lot of people don't have. They collect data, but it's across a bunch of sources. There's maybe problems with the data input quality and a bunch of other stuff. So they don't even have clean data to look at. So it's, kind of, are you running a marathon when it comes to visualizations, or are you just trying to crawl to actually get some good data first?
Sure. And I think that's really true. Like we talked about, like, okay, hey, what if you're deep on the engineering side? You can still do those front end reports. You can still do some lightweight data science. But I think the other side is true too. Like if you're in data science and you need to gather stuff, you need to do some data cleansing, you need to do those things, right? It's good to understand that those are capabilities you need to put in play, because who your resources are, what the ultimate goal is. But I like to make sure that we're lining this stuff up and in reality making sure people are using the right tool for the right job, regardless of where they sit in an organization, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so it's one of the reasons why I like Fabric. But Fabric is just a singular surface where all of these capabilities can all work together. It doesn't mean that other solutions where you have to go into different tools to do these things is wrong. It just means you have to have a pattern that would allow a data scientist to do some data engineering, some lightweight stuff, right? Or some reporting. And frankly, a big plug for Fabric is it breaks down that silo of data science working on one tool set or over in one area, data engineering working in another, and analysts working in another. Now they're all in one place, so that data scientist no longer has to throw stuff to data engineering, who then builds stuff in for the Power BI reports to then go to a consumer. Now you can just go from that data science experience right into Power BI, right to the consumer. So I think that's a huge win for Fabric.
I agree.
But yeah, awesome. All right, and that kind of gets us to that resource balancing and understanding your people and your skills. How do you design these solutions? You've got teams of data scientists. How do you start to fill in these gaps and address these and balance out your solution accordingly? But this will create technical debt, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have those things out there, like Reid, how many times have you been in a place where like the data is dirty, it's not well engineered, and you have to do so much work on the front end, right?
I think you should ask me the question of how many times has it not been? It's you're like you're asking me to find the needle in the haystack, you know?
Sure.
There are some times like I honestly actually surprisingly a lot of smaller companies have cleaner data. Like a smaller company that's large enough that they have a database. They have a couple a fairly basic database just for their client data or customer data, or they're using a CRM system or something like that. Those are the ones that I found as the sweet spot in the middle. They've grown up just enough that they're not using flat files anymore. They've already structured the data. But by the time you get to the enterprise where they have 18 departments and all that, like some are in Excel files, some are SharePoint, some are this CRM system spits out a CSV file. This company that we work with, we have to pay 5 times the amount. So we're manually downloading the data because it's cheaper to pay an employee to do that. So then it goes for like complex for a really small company, less complex for that little sweet spot, and then more complex again in enterprise. But I found like kind of right in the middle is where the cleanest just, there's like 30 tables in your database and that's the only data source you have. Yep. Oh, this is going to be so easy in the back end. This is great. So I honestly, specifically with every client, like I often tell them, like a end-to-end project, 40 to 60 hours for probably a data set and report. Like why? Because you have QA, you have rocks that are going to uncover more rocks. Like there's a lot of complexities and like it could maybe only take 30, but you need to be prepared that complexities will come up. Changes would need to be made. And if you're not willing to accept that the budget could be this, then like, you may not be ready to like start this type of a project. So I specifically build like 30 to 40% of the budgeted hours in specifically for the data cleansing, processing, model building, because so much of it goes in the back end. You've probably seen that little cartoon meme where it's an iceberg and there's like a little cute little bunny rabbit or something sit on the top of it. It's all pretty as and butterflies, and it looks underneath. There's skeletons and cobwebs, and it's like a little zombie horror show below this massive iceberg. And like that can be many data models. The data set delivered by the time it's actually in the report is a beautifully built model, but all of the pipes to get everything cleaned and processed and you're filtering out the muck to get it into there can be so complex. It's I have learned my lessons enough to like never expect the data to be clean. And even if a client tells me, yes, our data is clean, so I'll take your word that you think it's clean, but it may not be. And you need to be prepared that it likely won't be, because I'm going to uncover data at a level. I'm going to reveal data at a more granular level than you're probably used to seeing and combining it. Like, well, why are there no values here? Oh, that's right. We did a transition where these IDs used to be four characters and now it's 5. And we have to account for that now because we did a shift in 2018. So, a lot of clients really do not have an awareness of that until you actually start to pick apart the data and combine it, and you're noticing these little exceptions all over the place.
I mean, you're spot on, and I think a lot of that is why, like, I would highly encourage anyone who's listening, bring in your consumers into your build and your process as early as you can, right? So that they're gonna, people in the business are gonna know the feel of the data better than anyone in IT is ever gonna know. So make sure that you include them in as early as you can inside the development process.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is a great conversation. Thank you, Reid. We may not get through all the formulas that I've laid out, but I'm appreciative.
The chat's always good, I'm sure. And then
Yes.
we can go over by a little bit too. We don't have to have a hard stop. I'd say like we can go up to be 10, 15 minutes past.
Okay. All right. So, but thank you. The next one that I like to throw out there is, like, what are the factors that we're going to be applying towards our timing or our estimates, depending upon the layer in the organization that we're building for. If we've got something that is going to the enterprise, that's at least a 10x when it comes to time and consumption. Just in meetings and sign-offs and check-offs and and the complexity of that data, right? And as you go down the stack, you start to see that like that Fibonacci scale start to appear inside of those numbers and the timings. Being aware of that that's still a real thing is important, because we'll see that in a number of different places. And then, just being generally consistent in understanding of like, hey, what is your, the availability of someone, and the availability percentage times an 8-hour workday times the number of engineers at each of the level, right? That's going to give you the amount of resources that you have available. Do you have
Agreed.
enough in these categories, right? And when you're talking about like, okay, hey, I've got 500 tables, I've got this huge piece of work right in front of us. It's this type of math you got to get to in order to say like, yeah, this is it. Like 6 months is enough time, or no, we need a year in order to deliver on this, right?
What's a link if I was to Google something quick while you're on this, just to maybe give them some more resource or context related to these two equations? What would be a good thing that I could maybe throw into the chat for people?
I made this up right now, so
nice. Okay. I was gonna say if there was something I could point to that would be great. One other question that I'll always get, like, this is a great deck. So is this something that later on I could provide as a link, maybe back to your site or anything else, where there's like a PDF version of this for people to download?
Yes, I will be publishing this out on my Git repo that I will share over to you, Reid, that we can share out. Yep. I'm working on creating a whole set of content along these lines, so we can share that to people. So.
Beautiful.
Awesome. And then this is an uglier one, and excuse for the alignment there. I guess I didn't do a good job aligning that the way I thought I had, but understanding skill levels of the resources that you have starts to become increasingly complex, especially as you're talking about managing growing numbers of people. So if you're talking about an organization that's got 200, 300, 400, maybe 1,000 developers that are working in this space with all sorts of different data engineers, data analysts, data scientists, like understanding those skill factors and how you can break that up and divvying that up for work is exorbitantly difficult and challenging, right? But it's kind of important to really understand some of these factors, because that can really help you in figuring out what is the technical debt you can expect to have created as you build out your solutions. And this is something that like a lot of people don't look at a macro level. They attempt to define it at a micro level. But I think as an organization, we can really lay this stuff out and say, hey, if we're going to be choosing this layer and strategy when it comes to hiring, so specifically if we're talking about like, hey, I want to have a mix of, let's say I'm going to do 60% onshore, 40% offshore, and I'm going to choose these buckets when it comes to my salary ranges. A lot of that will translate into what are the skill levels and the engagement levels, right? And you can really start to create formulas along these lines to help you understand what the skill level of your organization is, as well as what is the technical debt that's being generated overall by the solutions that are out there. And
it'll be a really fun. I was saying what would be a really fun add to this slide is that Zach Galifianakis meme where it's his face and all the little numbers are kind of floating around, like all of a sudden have them start to shake and then his image just fades in and then fades back out. That would be a fun add to this slide,
Oh, that would be good. I'll have to do that. I apologize for not having that ready here. But I think there's a way to mitigate this. So if you are looking at this and doing your Zach Galifianakis, I think there's a way that we could start to use best practice templates, the best practice template factor, in order to mitigate a lot of these potential challenges, right? And so based upon the number of best practice templates that you have established and set up for use across your different capabilities, so your DN or your data engineer, analyst, and science space, that can really help you with understanding how you can adjust the technical debt of your builds. So no longer does it become this like, oh, hey, we've got this unmanageable amount of technical debt that's coming out, but we know we're going to have a degree of technical debt that's coming along, but we're making purposeful investments in building out these best practice templates and code bases that our developers are going to work from. And that's going to have an inverse relationship and impact on the technical debt that we hit. Oops.
Agreed.
Yep. All right. And then I have some more to come in this space, but I've just been really having fun with this. I hope this made sense to you and made sense to the people who are watching this.
I think people love the conversations in general, so that's something that I think I always personally enjoy. It's a great way for us to hang out and chat. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in to the chat here. I think there's about 17 people that are currently hanging out with us. I've seen some conversations and stuff back and forth. Looks like Greg popped in, as well as Donald Parrish. So we have a few familiar faces in there, but I've certainly been enjoying these conversations with you, Chris. This has been fun.
Completely agree. And I would love to hear from people what your thoughts are on this. I know my math ain't necessarily right. I'm not a scientist or some of that stuff, but I think some of these formulas I've been able to use, or a variation of it, to a very positive effect, and like actually using that formula to project what your technical debt build out is across the organization. And then after running through a technical debt assessment, like, oh, look, we're within a standard deviation of what we could expect with that. So
exactly,
that can be very useful in helping in your builds. So
I agree, and I think having the proper tools to be able to manage this, and like, and at the end of the day, just reducing technical debt. And sometimes, yeah, like a big part of it is having to push back. You know, it's going back to that triangle. It's like, all right, you're asking me for a bunch of stuff right now. You got 2 out of 3 of these choices to make. Do you want this fast, good quality, or cost effective?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And and like, you have to be a no person. You have to be able to say no to people sometimes. It's just like, no, I'm not going to do this. Why? Because this will hurt us in the long term if we do this. Like, we are not, I know you do not want to hear this answer, but this is not something we're going to do. Or I will personally not do this because I am, I do not want to lead you down the wrong path. I've definitely had to say that to clients a few times. Like, this, no, like, you're welcome to have somebody internally do this, but this is not something I will deliver to you because it is not of a quality that I think is indicative to what I want to deliver as a product to a client.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I don't know. How much are you in on the whole Myers-Briggs personality stuff? Do you follow that at all?
I at one point took the personality test.
Okay.
I'm like, I think it's fun. It's, it's also one of those where you can take the test over and over again and you will get different answers every time. So the retest reliability is not super high on that, but.
I've taken it 5 times. I got the same thing each time. So maybe it's good for me. I don't know.
Might be good for you, yeah.
But it seemed very, everything I've ever read about this stuff, it's like, oh my God, that's like, it's like looking in a mirror. But like one of my traits is the perceiving. Like, I can understand like exactly what you said. Like, this is bad. We should not do that. Why? Because it's bad, right? Which is not necessarily what an executive is going to want to hear. That's where I've fallen back on like formulas along these lines to help shape and describe, to bring some form to that perception that I've had. So kind of why create some things. That makes sense.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I don't see any other questions, so I think we can use this to kind of start wrapping up. But Chris, this has been super fun. I'll look for the link for you, and I'll make sure to drop that into both YouTube, the description, and then on my blog post. I'll have a link that goes directly to your GitHub repo, and link back to that for anybody who wants to check out the slide content for that. But this has been very fun, and like I said, I enjoy the conversational aspect of a lot of these. It allows us just to chat and hang out and geek out about a few things. So this has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Reid, for having me, and thanks for listening to me ramble, everyone.
Perfect. And then I'll I'll be off next week in Scotland. Just a couple of recorded videos will still be going online, and then I will be back in a couple of weeks to have on who's my next guest. It will be yes, Dennis. Okay, so yeah, I'll have some fun conversations on Wednesday the 20th. That will be my next live stream, hashing out the details on the actual content. But yeah, I'll be back online for another stream on September 20th when I'm back from Scotland.
Fantastic! Can't wait.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. You are a fun hype man as always, and I always appreciate the exposure you give the shirts and other fun merch.
I should wear all your shirts. Dang nabbit.
Oh yeah, because you have a couple.
Yeah. I
do you have one of the Tyndall ones? I can't remember.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. The last one I did with the Drake meme for the Tyndall. So I think that's my favorite of all the shirts that I've done because it's simple and it's very effective on like Tyndall versus Tyndall.
Yeah. Big fan.
Yeah. With that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and everyone else enjoy your afternoon, evening, or night. And I will see you back online in a few weeks.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.